The Victorian era, from 1837 to 1901 in Britain, was a period of profound change. It had a fascination with both technology and the supernatural, fueled by advancements in science and invention, which created a paradoxical blend of skepticism and paranormal belief. It was this era that gave birth to the concept of modern paranormal investigations. In 1882 in London, the first real paranormal research group was formed, the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. Unlike fortune tellers or Gothic novelists, these were distinguished Oxford and Cambridge graduates who sought to investigate the paranormal with scientific vigor. They catalogued their cases into a massive book called Phantasms of the Living, published in 1886. It's not an easy read by any means. At over 700 pages, it's full of dry analysis and careful skepticism, designed to prove to you perhaps that ghosts could maybe, just maybe, exist. But hidden within these many pages of dry scientific analysis are stories. Strange, chilling, unforgettable tales of ghostly visitations and psychic phenomena. And we've sifted through that thick Victorian tome to find them, so you don't have to, in order to uncover 6 of the most fascinating cases and expose them to the light of day after maybe 150 years of being buried in ancient libraries. So, dim the lights and let's open the SPR's casebook of Victorian ghosts. Case 1. The Tolling of the Phantom Bell. In 1862, a young sailor was making his way to Bombay. From the very beginning of the voyage, he felt a dark presentiment, an unshakable sense that some terrible news awaited him. He called this his black letter. Weeks passed, the ship reached St. Helena without incident. Perhaps he was wrong, he thought, but 2 days later, high aloft in the rigging with the 4th officer, he suddenly heard a bell tolling. It was so loud that he immediately scrambled down to check the ship's 2 bells, even touching them with his hands. Both were still, silent. Nobody else heard a sound. Chilled to the bone, he turned to his shipmate and said quietly, "That is my black letter." When they reached Falmouth, his dread was confirmed. A beloved woman, his aunt by marriage, but more like an older sister, had died during his voyage. She had always affectionately called him her young sailor love, and now at the moment of her death she had given him a final goodbye, marked forever by the toll of a phantom bell. After nearly 25 years, he said later, "I can still remember the boom of that bell." Next case, the ghastly man of Tavistock Square. One evening in 1878, a man was walking through London's Tavistock Square with a nurse trailing just behind him. All was calm and quiet. Then, out of the silence, a figure appeared. A young man, ghastly pale, striding towards them in evening dress. His face corpse-like in the moonlight. His step long and measured, yet eerily soundless. And strangest of all, perched upon his head was a tall white hat, and his eye held a glass monocle. The man recognized him at once, a friend and relative. Shock rooted him to the spot. The nurse behind him gave a shriek and fled in terror. A week later came the news. The friend had died that very morning. According to the rites of his Greek church, he had been buried in evening clothes, and only recently had he taken to wearing a monocle. Next case, the spectre at the nightlight. A man and his wife were lying in bed one night, a small nightlight flickering on the mantel. Suddenly, the man saw a draped figure gliding across the foot of the bed and toward the light. It stretched out a shadowy hand, and the light was snuffed out. The wife, clutching her husband's arm, had seen it too. The man leapt up, thinking it was an intruder, and gave chase. But every door and window was locked tight. No one was in the house. Whatever had visited them that night, both saw it, both swore to it, and both knew it could not be explained away. Next case, the veiled figure over Lizzie. In 1845, a young woman shared a bed with her younger relative. In the dead of night, she felt a weight on her chest, crushing her, suffocating her. Opening her eyes, she saw a terrifying sight. A sinister veiled figure bending over her, reaching down as if to claim her. Panic filled her, and then suddenly she felt her younger relative's arm wrap around her. The figure vanished. The girl whispered to her, "Oh, Lizzie, I thought it was going to take you away." Later, the younger girl explained that she too had awoken to see the veiled figure leaning over Lizzie. In terror, she had thrown her arm around her cousin, as if to hold her back from being carried off. The family moved out of the house soon afterwards, and no wonder. Next case, the captain with the rose. The final case is not just a ghost story, but a love story as well. A captain of Her Majesty's regiments had long loved a young lady. Despite a limp and a riding accident, he waltzed with her at every ball and taught her how to ride. At last, he pressed her for an answer to his courtship. She promised that at his next race, if she wore a rose and afterwards gave it to him, that would be her acceptance. On the appointed day, she wore the rose. He won his race and her heart. That evening, her mother held a celebratory ball. But as the first waltz began, the captain had not arrived. At last, the girl and her mother saw him enter, not in formal attire as would be expected, but in his military uniform. He wore her rose in his lapel. He walked slowly towards her, his limp pronounced, his face grave, his eyes fixed upon her with deep devotion. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. He never returned. The next morning, dreadful news arrived. The captain had drowned the night before while attempting to cross a swollen river. His watch had stopped at 10:15 p.m. as the ball was underway. When his body was found, the rose was still pinned to his uniform. It was buried with him. Yet he had kept his final promise, even after death, to come to her, to see her once more at the ball, with a love that even death could not kill. So there you have it. 6 of the most interesting tales from the huge tome of the SPR, teased out from among all the dry analysis. However, we're not quite finished yet. You see, the SPR didn't just deal with ghosts. A lot of their cases try to examine psychic phenomena in a scientific light. Perhaps they were the first significant historical group to ever try doing that. So let's end with a few of their more interesting cases of psychic knowledge. For example, records of the SPR tell of the time they were building the underground Thames Tunnel. There was a headmaster of the Leicestershire Grammar School at Leicester, and one night when he was in bed with his wife, he screamed in terror. She asked what had got into him, and he, in horror, said that he had seen the Thames Tunnel underground break through, that the workmen rushed to the staircases to escape, but one poor fellow was overtaken by the rush of water and perished. Feeling he had witnessed a true event and not just a dream, he was shaken and distraught. So much so, in fact, that he begged his wife not to sleep, but to talk to him until dawn. She kept telling him it was just a dream, but he insisted it was as real as could be. That same morning, they were visiting friends, and his host said, "Have you heard the sad news from London? The Thames Tunnel has broken in. All the people in the works escaped, except one poor fellow who was overwhelmed." The couple asked if he was joking at first, but when they realized that he was sincere, he told the entire company of people what he had dreamt and how it had left him shaken ever since. Here's maybe the first scientifically documented case of a psychic tip used to solve a murder. A man named William Eden was found dead on the road near Aylesbury, with several ribs broken. The attention of the police eventually came to a man named Tyler, and he was brought before the court. He had come to the attention of police because the wife of the murdered man said that when she was ironing a shirt on the very night of her husband's murder, she suddenly became aware of a feeling that her husband was near. Soon afterwards, she ran out of her house and screamed to her neighbors, "Oh dear God, my husband is murdered and his ribs are broken." She told this to several of her neighbors. She thought she saw her husband's apparition, she told them, and at the same time the man who had killed him, and she identified that man as Tyler. She had even seen her husband holding his ribs and Tyler with his hammer in hand, which witnesses testified Tyler often used very effectively as a weapon. On her psychic tip, as well as the corroborating circumstantial evidence that was later found to confirm her story, Tyler and his accomplice were condemned and executed. And lastly, in 1857 in London, a man was walking on Lower Thames Street to conduct some business. His mind was occupied with thoroughly commonplace business matters. The traffic and the activity was as normal as could be, and there was nothing to awaken any kind of fear in his mind. But then, when he was crossing Great Tower Street, he was suddenly seized with a mysterious panic. He was suddenly and inexplicably filled with dread that he might be attacked by a tiger. This ridiculous idea got hold of him and haunted him so powerfully that he broke into a terrified run, and he didn't stop until he was safely indoors. It was only the next morning that he read in the Times newspaper that exactly at the moment he became frightened, and only a mile from where he was, a tiger was transported in a cage and had actually escaped and ran loose in the streets, injuring several people. So there you have it, the meticulously selected cream of the crop from the casebook of the early years of the SPR, who themselves meticulously selected the paranormal happenings from out and throughout Victorian London and beyond, selecting only what could be called the scientifically credible cream of the crop. You can't get much creamier than that. So, have the scientists of the SPR managed to get you to believe in ghosts yet? Well, even if not, the rational scientists of Victorian London certainly were astute enough to suspend disbelief, and in doing so, raise the bar for all of us to begin to approach the unknown scientifically, albeit skeptically, rather than just with blanket dismissal. So, if you're watching this in a darkened room, one dark and stormy night, we hope we've inspired a goosebump or two, and maybe you'll be just a little more willing to suspend disbelief if you think you can see out of the corner of your eye a shrouded figure, coiled and ready to spring forward and put out your candle. Keep that flashlight ready, perhaps, just in case. Better safe than sorry. And if you're counting sheep and find yourself counting tigers instead, maybe trust that instinct. Because, as we've learned tonight, on the streets of London, as much as in your bedroom, the odds of a tiger attack may be low, but they are never zero.
Well, that just about wraps up tonight's tale from Lorehound. Join us as we sniff out more of history's most interesting stories.
As the hound dog entered the dimly lit library, he sensed an aura of mystery surrounding the ancient scrolls. The dusty shelves towered above him as he sniffed his way through the labyrinth of books. Suddenly, he picked up a scent and followed it to a secluded corner. With bated breath, he approached the shelf and pawed at the book, revealing the hidden scroll. As he rolled it out, he knew he had discovered a treasure worth protecting at all costs.